For many leagues the banks were much as they were above Thrawn, for now and then a curious temple rising on the farther hills toward the right, and a drowsy village on the shore with steep red roofs and nets spread in the sun. Mindful of his search, Carter questioned all the mariners closely about those whom they had met in the taverns of Kadath, asking the names and ways of the strange men with long narrow eyes, long-lobed ears, thin noses, and pointed chins, who came in dark ships from the north and traded onks for the carved jade and spun gold, and little red singing birds of Kadath. And these men and sailors knew not much, save that they talked but seldom and spread a kind of awe about them. Their land, very far away, was called Quanak, and not many people cared to go thither because it was cold twilight land and said to be close to unpleasant Leng, although high impassable mountains towered on the side where Leng was thought to lie, so that none might say whether this evil plateau with its horrible stone villages and unmentionable monastery were really there, or whether the rumor was only a fear that timid people felt in the night when those formidable barrier peaks loomed black against a rising moon. Certainly men reached Leng from very different oceans, of other boundaries of Inquanak. Those sailors had no notion, nor had they heard of the cold waste and unknown Kadath, save from vague, unplaced report, and of the marvelous sunset city which Carter sought they knew nothing at all. So the traveler asked no more of far things, but bided his time till he might talk with those strange men from cold twilight in Quanak, who are the seeds of such entities as carved their figures on Nagranek. Late in the day, the galleon reached those bends of the river which traverse the perfumed jungles of Kled. Here Carter wished he might disembark, for in those tropical tangles sweep wondrous places of ivory, lone and unbroken, where once dwelt fabulous monarchs of a land whose name is forgotten. Spells of the elder ones keep those places unharmed and undecayed, for it is written that there may one day be need of them again. And elephant caravans have glimpsed them from afar by moonlight, though none dares approach them closely because of the guardians to which their wholeness is due. Now, not per se the English word magic, but the Arabic word magic implies the involvement of these fire beings, these old ones, somehow. But the ship went on, and dusk hushed the hum of the day, and the first stars above blinked answers to the early fireflies on the banks as that jungle fell far behind, leaving only its fragrance as a memory that it had been. And all through the night that galleon floated on past mysteries unseen and unsuspected. Once a lookout reported fires on the hills to the east, but the sleepy captain said that they had better not be looked at too much, since it was highly uncertain just who or what had lit them. In the morning, the river had broadened out greatly, and Carter saw by the houses along the banks that they were close to vast trading cities of Halanath on the Carinarian Sea. Here the walls are of rugged granite, and the houses peakedly fantastic, with the beamed and plastered gables. The men of Halanath are more like those of the waking world than any others in dreamland, so that the theory is not sought except for barter, but is prized for the solid work of its artisans. The wharfs of Halanath are of oak, and there are the galleons made fast, while the captain traded in the and the taverns. Carter also went ashore and looked curiously upon the rutted streets, where wooden ox carts lumbered and feverish merchants cried their wares vacuously in the bazaars. The sea taverns were all close to the wharves, on cobbled lanes, seeded with the spray of high tides, and seemed exceedingly ancient, with their low black beamed ceilings and casements of greenish bull's-eye panes. Ancient sailors in those taverns talked much of distant ports, and told many stories of curious men from twilight in Kuanak, but had little to add to what the seamen of the galleon had told. Now, we didn't give people permission to go paint their bullseyes and go shooting out here. Tables of this last golden light of day, let them wonder and beauty beyond them. 2 nights and 2 days the galleon sailed over the Carenarian Sea, sighting no land, and speaking but one other vessel. Then, near sunset of the 2nd day, there loomed ahead the snowy peak of Aran with its ginkgo trees swaying on the lower slope. And Carter knew that they were to come to the land of Uth, Nargae, and the marvelous city of Kadath. Swiftly there came into sight the glittering minarets of that fabulous town, and the untarnished marble walls with their bronze statues, and the great stone bridge where Naraxa joins the sea. Then rose the gentle hills behind the town, with their groves and gardens of asphodels, and the small shrines and cottages upon them, and far in the background the purple ridge of the Tanarians, potent and mystical, behind which lay forbidden ways into the waking world and toward other regions of dream. Catching some Venusian character, don't you? The harbor was full of painted galleys, some of which were from the marble-clad city of Soranian that lies in the ethereal space beyond which the sea meets the sky, and some of which were from more substantial parts of dreamland. Among these, the steersman threaded his way up to the spice-fragrant wharves, where the galleon made fast in the dark, as the city's million lights began to twinkle out over the water. Ever new seemed this deathless city of vision, for here time has no power to tarnish or destroy. As it has always been, it's still the turquoise of Nath Hortha, and the 80 orchid-wreathed priests are the same who builded it 10,000 years ago. Shining still is the bronze of the great gates, nor are the onyx pavements ever worn or broken, and the great bronze statues on the walls look down on merchants and camel drivers, older than fable, yet without one gray hair in their forked beards. Carter did not once seek out the temple, or the palace, or the citadel, but stayed by the seaward wall among traders and sailors, and when it was too late for rumors and legends, he sought out an ancient tavern he knew well, and rested with dreams of the entities on unknown Kadath whom he sought. The next day he searched all along the quays for some of the strange mariners of Inquanak, but was told that none were now in port, their galley not being due from the north for full 2 weeks. He found, however, one Thorabonian sailor who had been to Inquanak and had worked in the onyx quarries of that twilight place, and this sailor said that there was certainly a descent to the north of the peopled region, which everybody seemed to fear and shun. The Thorabonian opined that this desert led around the utmost rim of impassable peaks into Lang's horrible plateau, and that this was why men feared it. though he admitted there were other vague tales of evil presences and nameless sentinels. Whether or not this could be the fabled waste wherein unknown Kadath stands, he did not know, but it seemed unlikely that those presences and sentinels, if indeed they existed, were stationed for naught. On the following day, Carter walked up the street of the Pillars to the Turquoise Temple and talked with the high priest, though Nath Horthoth is chiefly worshipped, and Kalafatis, all the great ones are mentioned in diurnal prayers, and the priest was reasonably versed in their moods. Like a tall and distant altar, he strongly advised against any attempts to see them, declaring they are testy and capricious, and subject to strange protection from the mindless other entities from outside, whose soul and messenger is the crawling chaos, Nyarlathotep. Their jealous hiding of the marvelous sunset city shewed clearly that they did not wish Carter to reach it, and it was doubtful how they would regard a guest whose object was to see them and plead before them. No man had ever found Kadath in the past, as it might just be as well if none ever found it in the future. Such rumors as were told about the Ank's castle of the Great Ones were not by any means reassuring. Having thanked the orchid-crowned high priest, Carter left the temple and sought out the bazaar of the sheep butchers, where the old chief of Kalafatis, his cats, dwelt, sleek and contented. That great and dignified being was sunning himself on the Ank's pavement, and extended a languid paw as his caller approached. But when Carter repeated the passwords and introductions furnished him by the old cat general of Althar, the furry patriarch became very cordial and communicative, and told much of the secret lore known to cats on the seaward slopes of Uth Nargae. Best of all, he repeated several things told him furtively by the timid waterfront cats of Kalafatis about the men of Inquanok, on whose dark ships no cats will go. It seems that these men have an aura not of earth about them, though that is not the reason why no cat will sail on their ships. The reason for this is that Inquanok holds shadows which no cat can endure, so that in all that cold twilight realm there is never a cheering purr or a homely mew. Ancient Egyptians called cats mew. Whether it be because of things wafted over the impassable peaks from hypothetical land, or because of things filtering down from the chilly desert to the north, none may say, but it remains a fact that in far land there broods a hint of outer space which cats do not like, and to which they are more sensitive than men. Therefore they will not go on the dark ships that seek the basalt quays of Inquanok. The old chief of the cats also told him where to find his friend, King Karanis, in whom Carter's latter dreams had reigned alternately in the rose crystal palace of the 70 Delights at Kadathais and the turreted cloud castle of sky-floating Serunian. It seemed that he could no more find content in those places, but had formed a mighty longing for the English cliffs and downlands of his boyhood, where in little dreaming villages England's old songs hover at evening behind lattice windows, and where grey church towers peep lovely through the verdure of distant valleys. He could not go back to these things in the waking world because his body was dead, but he had done the next best thing and dreamed a small tract of such countryside in the region east of the city, where meadows roll gracefully up from the sea cliffs to the foot of the Tenarian hills. There he dwelt in a grey Gothic manor house of stone, looking on the sea, and tried to think it was ancient Trevor Towers, where he was born, and where 13 generations of his forefathers had first seen the light. Out on the coast nearby, he had built a little Cornish fishing village, with steep cobbled ways, settling therein such people as had the most English faces, and seeking ever to teach them the dear remembered accents of old Cornwall fishers. And in the valley not far, he had reared a great Norman abbey, whose tower he could not see from his window, placing around it in the churchyard grey stones with the names of his ancestors carved thereon, with a moss somewhat like old England's moss. For though Kadath was a monarch in the land of dream, with all imagined pomps and marvels, splendors and beauties, ecstasies and delights, novelties and excitements at his command, he would gladly have resigned forever the whole of his power and luxury and freedom for one blessed day as a simple boy in that pure and quiet England, that ancient, beloved England which had molded his being and of which he must always be immutably a part. So, when Carter bade that old great chief of the cats adieu, he did not seek the terraced palace of rose crystal, but walked out the eastern gate and across the daisied fields towards a peaked gable, which he glimpsed through the oaks of a park, sloping up to the sea cliffs. And in time he came to a great hedge and a gate with a little brick lodge, and when he rang the bell, there hobbled to admit him no robed and anointed lackey of the palace, but a small, stubby old man in a smock. He spoke as best he could in the quaint tones of far Cornwall, and Carter walked up the shady path between the trees as near as possible to England's trees, and climbed the terraces among the gardens set out, as in Queen Anne's time. At the door flanked by stone cats in the old way, he was met by a whiskered butler in suitable livery, and was presently taken to the library where Kadath, Lord of Uth Nargad, and the sky around Serenian sat pensive in a chair by the window, looking on his little seacoast village, and wishing that his old nurse would come in and scold him because he was not ready for that hateful lawn party at the vicar's, with carriage waiting, and his mother nearly out of patience. Kadath, clad in a dressing gown of the sort favored by London tailors in his youth, rose eagerly to meet his guest, for the sight of an Anglo-Saxon from the waking world was very dear to him, even if it was a Saxon from Boston, Massachusetts, instead of from Cornwall. And for long they talked of old times, having much to say, because both were old dreamers and well versed in the wonders of incredible places. Kadath, indeed, had been out beyond the stars in the ultimate void, and was said to be the only one who would ever return sane from such a voyage. At length Carter brought up the subject of his quest, and asked of his host those questions he had asked of so many others. Kadath did not know where Kadath was, or the marvelous Sunset City, but he did know that the great ones were very dangerous creatures to seek out, and that the other entities had strange ways of protecting them from impertinent curiosity. He had learned much of the other entities in distant parts of space, especially in that region where form does not exist, and colored gases study the innermost secrets. The violet gas, Nagak, had told him terrible things of the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep, and had warned him never to approach the central void where the Daman Sultan, as a thought, gnaws hungrily in the dark. Now, when these New Agers tell you to picture these colors, and these colors are going to protect you, they're really invoking Shayateen Minal Jinn, and giving them power if they want to take that over their life in one way or another. So what's going to happen with that, and sometimes, beyond the visualization is really the realization of the Jnut, the fire-being realm, the elder realm, as we're saying, Altogether, it was not well to meddle with the elder ones. If they persistently denied all access to the marvelous Sunset City, it were better not to seek that city. Caranus, furthermore, doubted whether his guest would profit aught by coming to the city, even were he to gain it. He himself had dreamed and yearned long years for lovely Caliphatus and the land of Uth Nargae, and for the freedom and color and high experience of life devoid of its chains and conventions and stupidities. But now that he was come into that city and that land, and was the king thereof, he found the freedom and vividness all too soon worn out and monotonous for the want of linkage with anything firm in his feelings and memories. He was a king in Uth Nargae, but found no meaning therein, and drooped always for the old familiar things of England that had shaped his youth. All his kingdom would he give for the sound of Cornish church bells over the downs, and all the 1,000 minarets of Caliphatus for the steep homely roofs of the village near his home. So he told his guest that the unknown Sunset City might not hold that content he sought, and that perhaps it had better remain a glorious and half-remembered dream, for he had visited Carter often in the old waking days, and knew well the lovely New England slopes that had given him birth. As, Howard Phillips Lovecraft was an Anglophile, so it's coming in very clear here. At the last, he was very certain the seeker would not long only for the early remembered scenes, the glow of Beacon Hill at evening, the tall steeples and winding hill streets of quaint Kingsport, the hoary gambrel roofs of ancient and witch-haunted Arkham, and the blessed meads and valleys where stone walls rambled and white farmhouse gables peeped out from the bowers of verdure. These things he told Randolph Carter, but still the seeker held to his purpose, and in the end they parted each with his own conviction, and Carter went back through the bronze gate into Caliphatus and down the street of pillars to the old sea-wall where he talked more with the mariners of far ports, and waited for the dark ship from cold and twilight in Guanak, whose strange-faced sailors and ox traders had in them the blood of the great ones. One starlit evening, when the Pharos shone splendid over the harbor, the longed-for ship put in. The strange-faced sailors and traders appeared one by one, and appeared one by one and group by group in the ancient taverns along the seawall. It was very exciting to see again those living faces, so like the entity-like features of Negranek. But Carter did not hasten to speak with the silent seaman. He did not know how much of pride and secrecy and dim supernal memory might fill those children of the great ones, and was sure it would not be wise to tell them of his quest or acts too closely with that cold desert stretching north of their twilight land. Now, a lot of peoples put their own features into what they call the gods, or claim that the god. And to this day, you can find people's psychological issues into their limited ideas of divinity. By limited, I mean gender and all that stuff. They talked little with other folk in those ancient sea taverns, but would gather in groups in more remote corners and sing among themselves the haunting airs of unknown places, or chant long tales to one another in accents alien to the rest of dreamland. And so rare and moving were those airs and tales that one might guess their wonders from the faces of those who listened, even though the words came to common ears only as strange cadence and obscure melody. For a week, the strange seamen lingered in the taverns and traded in the bazaars of Caliphatus, and before they sailed, Carter had taken passage on their dark ship, telling them that he was an old ox miner and wishful to work in their quarries. That ship was very lovely and cunningly wrought, being of teak wood with ebony fittings and traceries of gold, and the cabin in which the traveler lodged had hangings of silver and velvet. One morning, at the turn of the tide, the sails were raised and the anchor lifted, and as Carter stood on the high stern, he saw the sunrise blazing walls and bronze statues and golden minarets of ageless Kadath sink into the distance, and the snowy peak of Mount Aran grew smaller and smaller. By noon, there was nothing in sight save the gentle blue of the Curinarian Sea, with one painted galley far off, bound for that realm of Serenian where the sea meets the sky. And the night came with gorgeous stars, and the dark ship steered for Charles Wynne and the Little Bear as they swung slowly round the pole, and the sailors sang strange songs of unknown places, and they murmured old chants and leaned over the rail to glimpse the luminous fish playing in bowers beneath the sea. Carter went to sleep at midnight and rose in the glow of a young morning, marking that the sun seemed further south than was its wont. And all through that second day he made progress in knowing the men of the ship, getting them little by little to talk of their cold twilight land, of their exquisite Ankh city, and of their fear of the high and impassable peaks beyond which Lang was said to be. They told him how sorry they were that no cats would stay in the land of Inquanac, and how they thought the hidden nearness of Lang was to blame for it. Only of the stony desert to the north they would not talk. There was something disquieting about that desert, and it was thought expedient not to admit its existence. On latter days they talked of the quarries in which Carter said he was going to work. There were many of them, for all the city of Inquanac was builded of onyx, whilst great polished blocks of it were traded in Renar, Algrathan, and Caliphas, and at home with the merchants of Thra, Alarnak, and Kadath, for the beautiful wares of those fabulous ports, and far to the north, almost in the cold desert, whose existence the men of Inquanac did not care to admit. There was an unused quarry greater than all the west, from which had been hewn in forgotten times such prodigious lumps and blocks, that the sight of their chiseled vacancies struck terror to all who beheld, who had mined those incredible blocks. And whither they had been transported, no man might say, but it was thought best not to trouble that quarry, around which such inhuman memories might conceivably cling. So was left all alone in the twilight, but only the raven and the rumored Shuntak bird to brood on its immensities. When Carter heard of this quarry, he was moved to deep thought, for he knew from old tales that the Great One's castle atop unknown Kadath is of onyx. Each day the sun wheeled lower and lower in the sky, and the mist overhead grew thicker and thicker, and in 2 weeks there was not any sunlight at all, but only a weird gray twilight shining through a dome of eternal cloud by day, and a cold starless phosphorescence from the underside of that cloud by night. On the 20th day, a great jagged rock in the sea was sighted from afar, the first land glimpse since Aran's snowy peak had dwindled behind the ship. Carter asked the captain the name of that rock, but was told that it had no name and had never been sought by any vessel because of the sounds that came from it at night. And when after dark, a dull and ceaseless howling arose from that jagged granite place. The traveler was glad that no stop had been made, and that the rock had no name. The seamen prayed and chanted till the noise was out of earshot. And Carter dreamed terrible dreams within dreams in the small hours. 2 mornings after that there loomed far ahead and to the east a line of great gray peaks whose tops were lost in the changeless clouds of that twilight world. And at the sight of them the sailors sang glad songs, and some knelt down on the deck to pray, so that Carter knew they were come to the land of Inquanac, and would soon be moored to the basalt quays of the great town bearing that land's name. Toward noon, a dark coastline appeared, and before 3 o'clock there stood out against the north the bulbous domes and fantastic spires of the Ankh city. Rare and curious did that archaic city rise above its walls and quays, all of the delicate black, with scrolls, flutings, and arabesques of inlaid gold. Tall and many-windowed were the houses, and carved on every side with flowers and patterns whose dark symmetries dazzled the eye with a beauty more poignant than light. Some ended in swelling domes that tapered to a point, others in terraced pyramids, run rose-clustered minarets, displaying every phase of strangeness and imagination. The walls were low and pierced by frequent gates, each under a great arc, rising high above the general level and capped by the head of an entity chiseled with that same skill displayed in the monstrous face on distant Nagrannik. On a hill in the center rose a 16-angled tower, greater than all the rest, and bearing a high pinnacled belfry, resting on a flattened dome. This, the seaman said, was the temple of the Elder Ones, and was ruled by an old high priest, sad with inner secrets.